Welcome once again to the librarian.support real-time sessions. Once again, this is a sort of thrown together and attempt to look at, talk to friends, families, and neighbors about providing some thoughts about when we get back into work. What is it going to look like after the pandemic, and what kinds of things can we begin to plan and think about? Looking at everything from innovation and scenario planning to emergency management to today talking around creativity, design, and new ways of thinking about library and community spaces. I am joined today by Erik Boekesteijn, which I'm no doubt saying horribly, and I apologize, my friend. This is why I was not born with a Dutch tongue. And
I've heard worse, David.
And Alex Clifton will also be speaking with us, who is the CEO of Storyhouse, which is in Chester in the United Kingdom. And just a few updates. Once again, these are every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 o'clock Eastern Time in the United States. And as we have determined through much Twitter discussion this morning, 1500 or 3 o'clock Central European Time. Also, as a reminder, the site librarian.support is there, where we posted pointers and other recordings here, other classes and such that people have put together. It's a collaboration between the University of South Carolina's School of Library and Information Science and the PL 2030, Public Libraries 2030 project, which is an amazing and wonderful project. And there we are also making sure that we are doing, unfortunately not enough, but doing a little bit to support the freelancers, consultants, and speakers that make up an important part of the library ecosystem. So they're talking about services there, and you can get some pointers to some really great people that can help you now. And doing, Matt Finch just joined us, who was a great first guest, and he's doing video coaching and services, and so you'll see that there as well. All right, so today, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about creativity, and I'm happy to begin the conversation talking with Erik. Erik's background is rather amazing. I first became aware of Erik when he was working at the Delft Library, and the DOC, and really at the time, still is, one of the most innovative libraries in the world. He took that and really spent a lot of time spreading the idea of innovation, community connection, creativity, and took it around the world, including literally touring around the world in mobile homes and such, and has been just a regular sort of creative mentor and soulmate to me. So I'm so glad you can join us. Good morning, Erik. How are you?
I'm fine, David. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this, really. So happy to be here.
So we're really in a situation where everyone is being very creative about what libraries look like online, and I think this is a really interesting moment because as it goes on day by day, it becomes clear just how much of a platform this becomes for change. Right? We're in a situation where we're all now a bit uncomfortable. We're all facing new realities, and we're figuring out how to move forward. And I think there's a famous economist who once said that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And so I love the idea of using this as a way of thinking differently. And you have spent a career doing that. I understand you have a little bit of introduction for some of those projects just to get us moving. Is that fair?
Yes. I have a few slides here, mainly because, and that's the sort of a contradiction. Mainly I was, my idea we were going to talk about was and that's also why I invited the great Alex that I will introduce later on, about Storyhouse, one of the most amazing libraries in the world, in my view, and I've seen quite a few around the world. Not only a library, it's a theater, a cinema, it's a cafe, restaurant, it has a studio. So I wanted to bring some slides along, and also on another library space in Sydney, Green Square Plaza and Library, nominated as one of the most beautiful libraries of the world by IFLA last year, and designed by two very young architects in Australia, Matthias Hollerstein and Felicity Stewart. I think it was finished only by Matthias because Felicity had some family circumstances and was forced to step out for a moment. But so I wanted to give an impression of a few of the slides, and those slides are about spaces and creativity in space. So we'll get on that a bit later, which is now in this world, which is totally mixed up, mostly digital. But no doubt, I have. Well, I'm really convinced we will beat this crisis at one point and go back to our spaces, and then the spaces will probably be even more important or as important as they were before. So, David, talking about creativity and what is happening as we speak, what I see online, and well, I work for the National Library, as you can see in the slide over here at the moment. Since 3 years, I'm working no longer in the Great Delft Library, but in the National Library of the Netherlands, the KB. And one of the things that I do there is from innovation to ideas, from idea to initiative. Libraries can call me in the Netherlands and sometimes even beyond our borders and say, Erik, I have an idea. Do you have any idea how to put this into practice? How can we make this work? Do you know any other examples that look like this? And that varies a lot. So that's basically where I come from and how my world works. What I see in this moment, and going back to the National Library, is that the moment that we heard that we were closing our library doors, we started an initiative called Crisis Library, Crisisdiep in Dutch. From crisis to opportunities, as you pointed out, David. There's always great chances and opportunities when these things happen. In a few days, this site just filled up with people and initiatives and people sharing great ideas and practice and helping each other out. So support, as we're trying to do right here, is right around the corner, and cooperation and transparency maybe is only like this little bit away from us in non-crisis times, to say so. Normally, when I had a period when I was working at DocLab, we had our own library innovation company. And you had to be a little bit more secretive about ideas because someone else might run away with it. And when your livelihood depends on that, you don't want that. And I think at this moment, everything is opening up and people are more open and willing to share creative ideas than before. If I talk too much, you have to shut me up, David. That's one thing I need to do.
Well, actually, if I could just piggyback on that in a second, I had a amazing, wonderful, truly impressive library science student who's now a wonderful, amazing, truly wonderful librarian, Meg Bacchus. And she was talking and doing studies about how libraries could support entrepreneurship. And the idea was, people would go into the libraries and the library would give them lessons or access or space or what have you to help them start companies. And in fact, I think one of the best examples of it was at the the British National Library did some amazing work in this area. But she found that a lot of public libraries talk the talk, but didn't necessarily do much within it. I mean, she'd go to the libraries and ask, all right, so did it work? Did you start companies? Did you start businesses? And the answer was, I mean, we should ask them. It was just, and what she came up to, which I thought was wonderful, is that entrepreneurship is about the financial economic marketplaces, and it is based around risk, that people have to risk their money, their savings, their time, etc., to start a business. And it takes a special person to want to take on that risk. And what she found, though, that a lot of people with great ideas, they may not want to take on the economic risk, wanted to develop the ideas. And what she found was that the library was a fabulous place around the marketplace of ideas that they could support and educate, but also connect people to share the ideas through open source software if they had technology, et cetera, et cetera. And really the idea that the library, the public library, would be a fabulous incubator of transparent and open ideas. And so it's something that really has stuck with me as a concept. And once again, what you're really doing currently at the KB and what you've done before.
Well, that's very true there, and I'm happy that you're saying that, because I like I said, sometimes these ideas pop up, and as I'm pretty new to the national area of the Netherlands, sometimes for me, I oversimplify maybe sometimes. Like we had the moment this happened, writers came up to me and said, Erik, I have nothing to do anymore because I'm not invited to libraries anymore. Can I do online reading to children? Quite famous writers would come up to me like and say that, and my first response would of course be like, yeah, by all means, go ahead. But it's sometimes not that simple, because the publishers will step in, the publishers will have something to say about it, and it takes sometimes some more thought. And I'm very happy that within a very short time we found a way to make this happen, together in collaboration with some writers organization and some other people, and with the approval of the publishers, which was absolutely great. But then another voice came from Belgium, saying like, "You guys in the Netherlands, we have some Dutch-speaking people here in Belgium as well. Can you open up the same material to the people in Belgium?" And then once again, I would be saying, yes, of course we can, but it's not that simple. So there's different ways to work on this, but I absolutely think that when you talk about innovation in libraries, and I think the places to go to, it's an amazing idea that you can lend ideas, that you no longer borrow a book, but you borrow an idea, or you borrow one of the things I have this sort of list on my desktop in the corner. It says big ideas. Is still that sort of what do you call this in English? This sort of you can hire an expert for 1 day a week for 3 months, and like a temporary worker. You hire a temp library expert. It could be a marketeer. It could be a teen advisor. It could be a collection specialist. It could be different sort of innovative librarians that you can hire 1 day a month for a period of time, and basically the knowledge that person brings along is shared among your staff, maybe 1 or 2 people, and you sort of incubate it and spread it again further and further.
Yeah, so, in the US we call them consultants, as Melissa points out from Denmark.
I cannot read that, Melissa. I'm so sorry. That's consultants, but consultants, believe me, I've seen quite a few consultant reports, and they don't always stay on the desk. They sometimes disappear, and they're usually rather expensive. So in this sort of way, I think there might also be a way to make it more affordable to the smaller rural libraries, or the places that find it hard to afford expensive consultants.
So, all right. So, walk us through some of because I want to make sure that people see some of these beautiful libraries you've worked on.
Yeah. Let's see how this works, because, like I said, there we go. So I already mentioned this. This is the library at Green Square Plaza in Sydney. I was very much hoping and looking forward to visiting this place when IFLA would have been in New Zealand this year, which wouldn't have been possible anyway. But anyway, and stopping over at Sydney to see it for myself. I was involved in the beginning when Matthias and Felicity, like I said, very young architects, won this project out of, I think, 168 architects from all around the world. They just came from school, I think, and they had little clues about what a library was all about. And this area in Sydney, I will not go into full detail about it, but it was like the whole area was being redeveloped. I think a $2 billion Australian dollars project, and they wanted to bring the library back first as a sort of a living room for the 5 to 6 years that the apartments would shoot up and would be filled with people. So community space. For the people who know about the size of Dock in Delft, 4,000 square meters. I think they were planning 700 meters of shelving, which is about 30,000 paper books. So not that many books, basically a space open to gather, to program, with classrooms. The square itself, as you can see here, and I borrowed this slide from Matthias himself, the space, the square itself was also part of the whole plan, and around the plaza, you see things that have to do with the history of the place, the heritage, the cultural heritage. There's artwork. They have outside planned the free libraries because the climate allows it. In the distance, you see the sort of cafe entrance, a sort of a Louvre-like space. You see a better view of it right here. It says libraries on the door, and this space is also possible to open more often than the whole library space, I think. The library runs underground, so to make perfect use of the plaza itself, they decided to build the library underground, which was not very easy with regard to flooding. We always hear that Australia is a very dry country with little rain, but when it rains, it can rain, but so there was quite some work to make it safe for that. But the beautiful, it's all very like it's tiny, but it's just sort of gorgeous. A lot of daylight coming in from the windows in the ceiling. Here's the tower. The tower that's on the other side. When you go underneath the ground, you come up to the tower. The tower has, on each floor, there's a sort of a different atmosphere, and study space, work space, classroom space, quite flexible, can be changed to the occasion. And outside, there's also cleverly designed, what you see in libraries quite often right now, looking at Dock 1 in Denmark, inside the building, sort of a theater space where you can have a stage outside, do a show, and have people watching from outside. So so far, I wanted to give an impression of successful spaces, community spaces with a library function, a very good library function. I don't want to be, what do you call it? I don't want to put not enough emphasis on the library function, but it's more than just a library. I think I would love to talk a little about how Storyhouse came about and how I met Alex, creative director of Storyhouse, and bring Alex in and show some of the slides, because I think, Alex, if you're out there, you brought me in, how many years ago was it?
7 years ago, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
I have a few slides here that we can run through, and if the people have questions, please put them down, and we will deal with them later on. From as an introduction, I could say something about how I was involved. Alex and Andrew called me, I think, in a moment that they succeeded in building the idea for the project and getting the money. Alex, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, to make it happen. And the original idea was to have in an old Odeon cinema building that was from the inside at least falling apart. The outside was still standing. They wanted to bring a theater. They wanted to bring a cafe restaurant, a studio, a cinema, because it was originally a cinema, and a library together. And at the moment that they called me, I think we were all working on how would this work? How can we have like one building? We didn't have the name yet. How can we have one building holding all these functions, functioning for not only Chester, but maybe the whole region, and making it like one sort of institute with one vision, one idea. And from there on, I give it to you, Alex, for a second.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, I'm looking at that picture of the building and feeling sad, because that feels like I'm looking at a photograph of something to do with my past. as I sit here in my
Say
study,
something about your
locked
past,
away from the
please.
world.
Yeah.
Well, but of course, well, I'll start with the past. Let's look at that because it's a beautiful building, and I think what Erik's touching on, why we brought Erik in was because he had a bright pink business card that said on it "Innovate or Die," and it certainly felt like we needed somebody with that all but aggressive hunger for innovation, which frankly is a hunger that we feel more keenly today than ever before. But the innovation that we were interested in at that point was all about integration. How could we integrate these 3-4 different services? How could we genuinely integrate the services of a theatre, the services of a cinema, the services of a restaurant, and the services of a library, all in service of the social mission that underpins all libraries. First and foremost, we wanted to make somewhere that was a library and could be and would be understood by its community as a library. A safe space for creativity, celebrating community curiosity, empowering citizens as creative citizens, understanding their social responsibility towards each other, and tapping into our storytelling resources as a tool for sparking social change and imagination. And so working with Erik, that was a lot about, of course, the building itself. That was a lot about not putting lockable doors anywhere, so that anytime our theatre was open, our library was open. Anytime our restaurant was open, our library was open. And that physical integration has delivered us some of the longest opening hours that we're aware of for any library, certainly in the UK, I think. We're open 8 a.m. in the morning when we are, other than when we're told by the government we have to be shut. We're open from 8 in the morning till 11:30 at night, every day of the week, 364 days a year, because our restaurant opens early in the morning for coffee and fancy expensive poached eggs, and our cinema or theatre won't close until 11:30 at night, and so nor can our library. And that physical integration was critical, but also then the human integration. How do you then go about integrating the staff teams so that you could never have a visitor coming into our building and approaching somebody and having them say, "Oh, I'm Gareth in libraries, you need to speak to Sandra in theatres about that." We wanted to make sure that no matter who you approached, they would understand the building as one storytelling centre, as one community centre. And so the integration of the staff was something that Erik in particular helped us lead on, was bringing together restaurant staff, theatre staff and library staff into one coherent team who could work together to sell theatre tickets, yes, clear cups of coffee, yes, but most importantly, direct you to the transport section, help you print off your CV, lead you in a singing or storytelling session. Erik, you wanted to jump in, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, Alex, because I have this little video to show people who have never been to Chester, and there's probably quite a few, except for Ian, of course. And maybe because I don't think the sound will work, you can sort of give a sort of a live comment to this video.
Sure, yeah. Aha. Yeah, so you're inside the well, hello, that's me. You're inside the old building here. This is the Odeon cinema end of the building, which is where the old cinema used to be. There's our little storytelling room, the wonderful Louise, who's one of 23 staff who work front of house for us, managing our customers and visitors. Yeah, that's where our PCSO, our local police constables, come and tell stories. There's newspapers available all day, every day. So you can see that the books, 50,000 books, wrapped all around the building and fully integrated in the building, so that no matter what time of day it is or where you are in the building, you know you're in a library. A library, yes, that's fully connected to the wider library service in Cheshire West. So we're part of the network of 25 different libraries across the borough. And so all of those books are moving across the whole of Cheshire still. We're fully connected to the wider library service and its networks, both online and social. There's our cinema in the middle there. That little glass box inside the brick box is our cinema. That big red staircase leads you into our theatres. We have 2 theatre spaces there. Some bits of digital technology that Erik adores. I'm less fond of because well, we have a constant back and forth about that, don't we, Erik, that we won't touch on here. But really, you can see how it's used. I think when we were designing the space, one of the critical things we were trying to do was to treat the space as a space that everybody would understand. I think there are lots of people who find libraries intimidating. I think there are lots of people who find theatres intimidating. So we wanted to design a space that felt most of all like somewhere that people could interpret easily, would know how to behave in. There's our theatre. So we tried to design it as much in the spirit of a Costa Coffee or a Starbucks or something, more like a coffee shop than anything else, so that we could be confident that our visitors and customers would come into the building and understand how to behave in it, would understand the language that they could use, the behaviours that were acceptable, the noise that would be allowed. We pipe music through the whole building except for one corner of it, which is quiet, but otherwise the building is always noisy. And it should be understood that you can bring your own food in if you want to, tip up with your Diet Coke in a can and sandwiches in a wrapper, or spend a good deal of money on some of our fancy Levantine sharing platters to enjoy with your friends and family.
But Alex, the theatre, let me interrupt you for 1 second, because I really love the theatre, and the space is absolutely stunning and gorgeous. It holds about 500-600 people, I think.
So it's the photograph that you see here holds 500 people. That's a thrust stage. You can see the audience is wrapped around on 3 sides of the auditorium, which makes for a really gorgeous, warm, conversational storytelling space in which we can do, as you can see, our production of A Midsummer Night's Dream going on. We produce about 11 productions every year ourselves in that space with our local communities. So those are shows that will have volunteer performers on stage, local trainees on stage, working alongside professional actors, in shows that we make in collaboration or in partnership with our local communities. So we'll make shows with local charities in particular, contributing to the stories that we choose and how we tell those stories.
But Alex, like I said, because sorry, David, the idea for, I think, springs to mind as I listen to you is that you were, besides Storyhouse, the theater idea around Storyhouse is not only inside the building. I think before Storyhouse opened, you already did the outside theater festivals. You were well connected in a network of creative arts in the city of Chester and beyond that, I think, which probably helped in when you put it into this building to bring also the network into this building, and made that way of working, that process of seeing the philosophy of this house is your house happen.
Yeah, that's
right.
Am I
correct?
You're absolutely right. We've been running an open-air theatre in the city since 2010. We've been running an open-air cinema alongside that theatre in the city, in the park, since 2012. We've been producing arts events around the city walls and on the streets of the city since 2007. So we've been making a lot of work in the city, a lot of creative activity in the city in the period of planning the building and the run-up to actually opening the building. And we still run those today. We still run our open-air theatre and open-air cinema, which, God willing and government willing, will be running this summer as well, with our open-air library now as well, that will be joining it with storytelling in tents in the parks and books available in tents in the parks, so that we can all get outside and enjoy some vitamin D. And that gave us a really strong set of relationships with our local communities that we were able to enhance and build on when we moved indoors and took control of the building as a community resource.
David, Alex, did you have a question? Because I did.
Alex, you had talked about one of your visions for this was sparking social change. What kind of social change were you looking to spark?
Well, it's about a process rather than an output. So it was never that I was particularly focused on an outcome, a social outcome of my own, but more a process that could empower others to achieve their own social outcomes. So the idea was about community empowerment. So as a for example of how that operates, over the course of any month in Storyhouse, 131 different groups will meet for free in our building to run their own cultural activities. Choirs, Scrabble clubs, Italian language classes, Arabic for over 50s, Spanish for over 5-year-olds, LGBT curious sessions, bereavement, survivors of suicide meeting as a support group, and so on and so forth. So over the course of the month, as many as possible meet in our building for free and use it as their own creative tool for their own cultural expression. So when we understand ourselves as a cultural centre, we mean culture not in the sense of books and plays and films, but culture in the sense of the shared values, shared beliefs, shared rituals, shared languages that bind societies and communities together, but also place them in opposition to each other. And so ours is a home for anywhere where people come to assess, address, celebrate, challenge, interrogate their own cultural identities. And that's the spirit in which we want to be a cultural centre, is a home for people's cultural expressions. And then we then apply ourselves to doing that, giving different communities, different groups opportunities to take control of different spaces in our building and program them themselves directly.
So I'm curious because I think let me ask you it this way. Is there, when you're bringing together theater, cinema, libraries, restaurant, I imagine each of these comes with its own community, its own subculture, if you will, like the theater goers. And while there may have been some, did you find that there was some overlap before? And then as the space has opened, have you found that those groups are really commingling?
Yeah, they are massively different cultural groups, aren't they? I think that is there crossover, yes, but it's slim. Probably in the cinema, that's where you see the most crossover between our library users and our theatre goers. But again, I think the cultural identity of a library and the cultural identity of a theatre, those are quite complex cultures themselves. They come with their own expectations about how I'm supposed to dress, about how loud I'm supposed to speak, or what kinds of language I should be able to use, or who I will expect to see in there, what social class of people I will expect to be surrounded by. And those cultures are the ones that we wanted to challenge, I think, and try and work against, to try and, when I talk about creating a space that was designed to feel like a coffee shop, I'm meaning that because I think coffee shops are some of the most democratic spaces that you get in city centres at the moment. They're spaces that there are very few people who feel, there are people, but there are many fewer people who feel ostracised or excluded from a coffee shop than feel excluded or marginalised in a theatre or a library, I think. Certainly in a theatre or a cinema, that's true. I think it's less true of a library, but it's still relevant. And so we were trying to create a space that felt culturally, in terms of how it looked, its wallpaper, its environment, didn't feel like a theatre, because that would have created us barriers. There are no reception desks, for example. If you walk into Storyhouse, you won't be met by somebody behind a desk with a computer who's probably just playing Scrabble on Facebook, and probably looks, well, they'll look like my mum, probably. In all truth, probably in Storyhouse, they would actually be my mum. And so the crucial thing is that we took that away and made the decision that actually when anybody should be able to walk in there and not have that moment of confrontation. That can be a moment of welcome, but quite often that, hello, can I help you? It feels like it's coded with something more controlling than that. You won't walk past, as Ian points out now, you won't walk past any security sensors that will alert us that you're leaving with something you shouldn't be, because they're your books anyway. You own them, so why would we have any objection to you taking them out of the building? We've lost stuff. We've had one hard drive stolen in 3 years. We've had a monkey stolen off our walls that we had. Not a real monkey, I'm pleased to say, David, but barely anything gets stolen. We have a space that doesn't have visible security, doesn't have a reception desk or a box office. It's as open and free a space as we can make it, where what we're trying to communicate at every level is that this house is your house, that you own this book, you own this building. We didn't pay for it, you did. It's a community-owned centre, and we're just the honoured to be the sort of legacy holders at the moment. But all we're doing is acting in service of our communities, and so that we've tried to create a building that reflects that in every way and is as accessible with its subliminal psychosocial messaging as possible as well. Yeah.
I remember, I think there's several Danish libraries that are open 24 hours a day, not staffed 24 hours a day. And I remember in a conference when I believe it was Marie was talking about this, and just watching all the librarians sit there and go, how is that possible? Isn't it, you come in the next day and horrible things have happened, and how much preparation? They said, well, we just tried it, and it turns out the community feels ownership of the space, and when they feel ownership of the space, they take care of the space and even provide safety and ownership and steward that space, which I thought was fascinating. And Erik, I don't want to take yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, because I was going through these slides and looking at, I don't want to forget that design and the way the spaces, the signage, and as I said, I've seen quite a few libraries, as you have, and I took Alex and Andrew to quite a few libraries. I think the way spaces are designed and the way it's where to go, what you is expected of your behavior is also so much in design. I think when I first came to Storyhouse, when it was opening, before the official opening by the Queen, I saw that like almost every inch of the building was sort of curated, was cared for, had special attention. And I have to name Hannah Weber, who did most of the interior design here and the signage, I think, because I worked with Hannah recently on a library in the Netherlands. That was, I think, Alex, the director, Petra, went over at least 6 times to Chester to say, like, okay, yeah, this is what I want. And each time she brought a politician from the local council, or she brought someone else along, and she said, this is what we want, this is what we want. And you cannot copy paste creativity, but you can look at the way design works. And that's also the reason why I wanted to bring in slides, because I could easily talk with you guys for 2 hours, 3 hours, although people will get bored and probably leave. But I think we have to talk about the design. Design plays an important part in the success of Storyhouse and getting that message across that this building is your building. And Alex, you have to mention as well the marketing department. I don't have any slides saying that, but some of the events that you do, and maybe this is not the best slide to show it, but some of the events that you do are really astonishing, and they always warm my heart when I see them pass by on Twitter or Facebook or all the media that's out there.
So part of our programming policy is that we program as little as possible ourselves. So we have relationships, formal relationships with 116 different charities in the borough who work with particularly marginalized communities. So I think there's nothing, we're trying to nurture a democracy, a creative democracy in our city. Now, clearly democracies are a reflection of your majority community. And inside a building like Storyhouse, the majority will always take care of themselves. The book stock that we have in the building is a reflection of majority taste, because we respond to the most popular books. We get more of that type. So the majority take care of themselves in there. In our theatre, the stuff that we program that's visiting work, not made by us, that's there because it makes us money. And that's a reflection of majority taste. And that means that for us as a staff, if we want to have a democratic space, we have to work for the minority communities, for whom the market will often not work. So we see it as our job here to create meaningful pathways for minority communities to have their voices expressed inside our building. And what that means is that we carve out time in our calendar, weeks at a time, for specific charities to take control of the building. And we work with those charities. For example, this footage you're seeing here is a flamenco class for adults in wheelchair users. Now, that was an event that was curated as part of Kaleidoscope. 23 different charities who support people living with disability worked with us to program our cinema, both of our theatre spaces, and the entirety of our library and its public spaces with activity that they wanted to see. So on our main stage, we had Stopgap Dance Company and Canduco, 2 amazing disability-led dance companies and professional dance companies in the UK. On our cinema, we had on Blindness, I think, on the day of this, a great movie about the experience of living with blindness. And so on. And over the course of that week, those 23 charities filled our building and curated our building in its entirety. And we do that throughout the year with different targeted groups who might otherwise be excluded from the building by virtue of not having a majority of a taste, a majority desire or opinion. So that's we have a languages festival that celebrates the diversity of speaking cultures in the city, where we hand over control to immigrant communities for a week, and so on. There are 6 of those that run through the year, each targeted at, and most importantly, made by, curated by those communities directly themselves. And our job then is to administrate those events, make cups of tea, clean rooms for other people's creativity and programming tastes. And that's the way in which we try to serve the democracy.
Alex and David, what I wanted to, before I forget, I mean, I was over there for the annual report, and David, the annual report was done live on stage. These guys just did. They invited some of the partners, because you couldn't invite 135 partners, but invited some of the partners to actually express the value of Storyhouse to them, and by showing them what, like, excerpts of what they've done. I saw the Fallen Angels group. I saw the Young Librarians team, the Young Leaders group. Maybe Alex, it's good to say something about the Young Leaders group, because I think that's something that libraries around the world can really take example of. You know, it's really a cool project.
So you're looking at a photograph here. The two young women in red t-shirts there are two of our young leaders. They're at that point presenting on stage as part of Storyhouse Women, a festival celebrating feminists in our city. So our Young Leaders program works with 73 young people at the moment who have been brought to us on referral from the local government's children's services and other agencies that support young people who've fallen out of education and training and employment and are deemed vulnerable by the local authority. Those young people are brought to us, and we work with them with a very simple agenda, which is to try and get them jobs. And so over the course of, at the shortest, 4 months, the longest program runs for about 18 months. And we work with these young people to support them through a program of mentoring, shadowing and training opportunities. Every staff member in Storyhouse has a contractual stipulation to act as a mentor to one of these young people, and we train our staff to do that. And they can work 2-to-1, always with a pastoral staff member present, but they work with those young people as a mentor. All of our heads of department provide training workshops to support those young people to develop skills and expertise in marketing, in programming, in finance, in hospitality and catering, in the service sector. Basically across the breadth of our organization, staff provide training. And then working in partnership with other local employers, we skill those young people up to the point where they can then run their own project at Storyhouse. So we give them control of the whole building. The last event that they did was a massive fun palace that was a takeover for 3 days. We had 5,500 people through the doors every day, and basically all the events that those young people program, they budget it themselves, they event manage it themselves, they market it themselves, they program it themselves with our support, but they provide all that leadership. We're on the ground with them, helping them manage the public, but I swear to you, the dog work of this is done by those young people. And at the end of it, of course, the impact on their young lives is pretty transformational. And it's the only project that we run where I can confidently say that project not only changes young lives, but it's genuinely saved lives too. There are young people who are part of that program who wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for that project, which has made some enormous interventions in their lives. And most powerfully of all for me is seeing those young people leave us and go off to go and work in local enterprise, in local businesses where we've helped them enter a recruitment pool that we operate that helps them get jobs. Those jobs, the vast majority of those jobs are entry-level employment. I'm talking about, well, one of these two young women is now working as a duty manager at Chimichanga's restaurant. I'm delighted to say she turned down a job that we offered her along the way because Chimichanga's she thought was more tempting. But you know, you can't win all battles. But you see that project, you're talking about young people who are all of them, the majority will have, well, the majority of our current beneficiaries will have attempted suicide at some point, and will be living with significant mental health challenges. And we're supporting them using our books and plays and films and things. We're supporting them to find their own voices with greater confidence to the point where they can apply for and get jobs that deliver them with that level of independence that they are all ultimately striving for.
And the whole building, here you see music in the cafe. The whole building is also surrounded with poetry. So this, I think, Alex, is Children's Hospital Week. And you see written on the wall for the occasion, "I'm not defined by my scars, but by my incredible ability to heal." David, I know you have millions of questions and we have to look at the time, but this was the first annual report of a library that actually had me in tears. I mean, I was really moved by the people on stage and expressing their love and their value for the place that was offered to them. It was really impressive.
So I do have two areas I'd like to sneak in here before our hour's up. But let's start with the obvious one. How adaptable is this idea outside of Chester, right? So in other words, obviously not, footprint inch for inch design wise, but a lot of what you're talking about, is this, you think, unique to Chester? Is this something that we could do in Columbia, South Carolina,
Perhaps predictably, David, and particularly because at the moment the building is not open, I think that it is absolutely crucial that we understand we're not a building. And yes, design is important, and yes, we designed the building, and I'm proud of the building, but we're not a building. The building is not what makes Storyhouse special. We're a creative community, and what makes us special is the integration of expertise. And in our case, that happens to be library expertise, theatre making expertise, movie expertise, and food expertise. And we've integrated all those expertise, but we are ultimately, all we are is a creative community. And I've never felt that more keenly than I feel it now. And as a creative community, right now, of course, we've only got one democratic challenge to our society that we need to focus on. But of course, at any given point in our lives, there will be democratic social challenges that any creative community should gather together to try and address. And in our case, right now, more keenly than ever without the building, that comes down to simply the mission, empowering creativity as a tool for social change. And then how do we achieve that mission? We go and we work with minority communities, marginalized communities, vulnerable communities. Again, I feel this more keenly today than ever before, but where are the communities who are most vulnerable today? Then we ask them, what do they need? What do they want? And they tell us what they want. And then we match our expertise and our resources, whether those are physical resources or human resources, to their needs, and then address them with those expertise and talents. We apply our creativity to their creative hunger and need, and support them to empower themselves as creative change makers in their communities. That's not about the building. That's about an attitude towards community, which is about empowering communities with their creativity, normalizing creativity in their lives, and then empowering that creativity as a tool for change in their societies, addressing their needs as self-defined.
So,
and David, 1 second before we started out, and I was telling you what my work was at the National Library at the moment, and the idea from idea to initiative to actually make things happen. I had like 5 requests from the Netherlands only, telling me like, we want a story house in our city. Can you help us build a story house in our city? So definitely, I said it's not copy paste, but the philosophy behind it is definitely. There is a want for this, definitely.
So several years ago, when I teach the introductory course for librarianship, so I'm teaching future librarians, and when I teach, I always create this discussion board that's anonymized, so people can ask questions that they might not feel they otherwise would be comfortable with, right? So whether they feel that it's a stupid question or whatever it is, wanted to give them an outlet. And this idea that after a sort of standard preaching session that I tended to do around librarians being creative, librarians being innovative, librarians, finding ways to change. This one post, which has obviously always stuck with me for years and years and years, one of the students put, "I am a worker bee." She goes, she or he said, "If you give me a task to do, I will do it beautifully, I will do it wonderfully, I will do it with dedication, and I will be the best worker, best employee you could imagine. But I am a worker bee. Do not consider myself creative. I do not consider myself an innovator." I'm wondering, as you built this creative community, which, if I understand correctly, isn't just the staff, but it's also obviously the whole community and these different folks who are volunteering time who come to this theater session. What was the design or onboarding process that you had to go through to get staff so that they felt like they could be more than just worker bees? Or is it a matter of saying, no, they're allowed to be worker bees, that's fine, but they're the platform that creativity happens?
Yeah. I mean, two things, aren't there? Of course, it's not. I'm not going to have a very clean answer to that one, David, except to say that worker bees is a really beautiful image that they've come up with there, isn't it? And a very creative one at that. I would just observe that. Yes, I think of course, our building is built on a principle that we believe that everybody is creative as an intrinsic part of your human identity. Of course, I believe that foundationally, because I struggle to see the world any other way based on human behavior and interactions that I've had throughout my life. Of course, we're all creative, right? But the onboarding process, as you put it, I think was really, Erik came on board for that conversation as well. We ran a series of workshops. I got a bunch of, so the library staff who were already working in Chester Library, I did over the course of 2 years a series of workshops with them. Den building workshops, storytelling workshops. We got massive, great big parachutes and sheets and lamps and torches and told each other stories. And the truth is, of course, that not everybody who went through that process chose to come and work at Storyhouse. I think there were 3 or 4 people who decided, actually, do you know what? I don't want to hide underneath a bed sheet with a standard lamp telling you stories from fairy tales. I just don't want to do that. And that's, of course, completely fine. But the vast majority of staff bought into that completely, and not only that aesthetic, by the way, but also taking on your worker bee thing. One of our caretakers in the building, John, not a storyteller, definitely a caretaker, who did say, however, that he was really interested in bees. Well, John is the guy who helped set up the beekeeping on our roof that we have. So we have 2 beehives up on the roof that John came up with. Louise, who's a passionate gardener, set up a gardening group at Storyhouse. Louise would not define herself as creative. John would not define himself as creative, and that's fine. You don't need to. But you are passionate about bees. You are passionate about gardening. So let's respond to that passion and bring that into work. Carol is a very passionate cyclist. Brilliant. So have we got a bike mending group that wants to gather at Storyhouse? Well, yes, it turns out we have. And so on. So it's responding to people's passions. I interpret that as creativity. Carol, Louise, John, none of these staff members need to interpret that as creativity. They do have passions, and it is then about responding to their passions and saying, well, in that case, let's curate a community around that passion. Let's celebrate that passion that you have and find other people who share that passion with you. And then let's just use Storyhouse as a vehicle for you to communicate your passion together. Now, I think that's clearly a very powerful cultural statement from those staff members. They feel celebrated and empowered because of that. And I would interpret that as a massively creative act from each of them. I can tell you for free, several of those staff members wouldn't. So,
and Alex, what I want to add is that we did this session, and I have to mention also that we at one stage we had the brilliant Katie Pekakar over from the UK, in the UK, and when we were doing a session with the staff members, the librarians in the building, we talked about curiosity, as you mentioned earlier, and curating curiosity was determined as one of the most, besides storytelling, the most interesting aspect of working at Storyhouse in the future. And I just, before the session started, I came across my good friend Paul Holdengraver, who put on Twitter, "It's not the answer that enlightens, but the question," from Eugene Ionesco. He loves this quote. The man is full of quotes. Brilliant guy, Dave. You should get him on the show. Yeah. But I think that's if you're not creative, but it triggers you to send people home with more questions than they come in with, you can do this work, and you will love this work. You will love working there in a place like this.
David, I would just want to underline as well, I think the building is beautiful, but I think the building is not the point for me. The building is simply, what's special about the building is it has been coherently designed around a beautiful idea. And the beautiful idea, community curation of, by and for your communities, is one that can be applied in any setting, can't it? I think. Our building is more sympathetic than many to that agenda because it has been designed around that idea. but the fundamentals of the idea are applicable. They are. I feel like these ideas are ideas that are current in the library sector more than any other sector. We've just designed a building around them. It is a movement. Understanding the library as a movement is the right thing, as previous guests have spoken about more eloquently than I will. And so I think that movement can be pursued. Community curation, community curiosity. These are all other people's ideas that we've created a building around.
I'm fond of telling people that innovation is not necessarily invention. Innovation is taking really good ideas you may discover in alternate settings and adapting and applying in a creative way. So here's my question. Now that there is a story house, the second story house is going to be easier because there's a first one, right? The idea is you can look, that worked out, that was safe. Before there was a story house, how did you bring local council on board? How did you bring the stakeholders in terms of finance, in terms of such, on board?
Yeah. By way of good fortune, really. I mean, the local authority didn't need to be brought on board. They were really passionate about the need for a cultural centre in the middle of the city. They wanted us to build a theatre. The initial conversation was, please, they were working with Andrew and I as consultants to help them develop a new theatre space in the city. Over the course of the months and years that followed, that conversation shifted as persuaded the bosses in the city centre, as they asked us to house a cinema as well. Recognise the huge opportunity that housing a library might present as well. But it was never a question of enlist them or persuade them. They were all already committed.
Excellent. So Erik, what is your, what can people...
Can you hear me? Am I...
No.
Erik, I'm just wondering, once we have all of 3 minutes left, so
yes.
Talk to me about what people can be doing while they're at home, watching and listening to this. What kinds of activities, what kind of reaching out, what kind of resources do you think that some of our library staff should be engaging in to sort of get their juices going?
Well, that's a good question that I ask myself every morning when I wake up. But no, that's not true. Well, I was reading Nina Simon's blog. Definitely worth checking out. And I think that what we tend to do, what I myself, let's talk about myself, tend to do is that you want to find a solution to as many problems as possible in as shorter time as possible. And I think one thing that we will learn from this is that we have a moment to take a deep breath and to look at the period way beyond this. How will we look like when we come out of this in a year, 2 years, 3 years? This is going to be a mark. This is going to change cultural institutions. And I hear from several people in the network already that they are giving this some extra thought, but trying to resist to come up with the most obvious solutions for the now. Of course, we want to deliver services. We want to think of ways that we can still have those children read at home or do programming that we can do at home with the kids. But we have to think of how will this affect our institutions, and how can we change to be maybe different in the future. And I think for me, it works in the sense that when I feel like sort of down from why is this all happening, it sort of helps me to look at a brighter future and be more positive. And then sometimes things spring to mind, different way of organizing conferences, different ways of talking to each other, different way of reaching out. I mean, as you always say, David, we're in the human business, we're in the knowledge business, and there's so many ways to be still enlightened by a good conversation and to come up with some brilliant ideas, write them down and then throw them away again, whatever. I mean, I think looking in the longer term, trying to work on a longer term vision in a different world is a good thing to keep yourself occupied.
And I think that's an excellent way to end the session. Jill, really quickly, Jill, what was or Eric, what was the blog that you had mentioned? Nina
Simon's blog from Santa Cruz, Off Buy for All. Go out Off Buy for All, check Nina Simon, and you will find her blog somewhere.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time today, and we will check in pretty regularly. But thank you so much, and thanks for all of our audience in real time and through the archive. We'll be getting together again on Thursday. We'll be talking with Clayton Copeland about universal design and making sure that we're reaching out to differently abled people once we plan in. So appreciate it, and see you all online. Please stay healthy and wash your hands, as they say. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Ciao, ciao.